We're here today with Michael Gordon Shapiro and Joshua Finkel.
Hey.
Michael is a book writer, lyricist, and composer, member of New Musicals, Inc., who's working on a new musical called The Bully Problem, and we're going to talk to him about that today. And Joshua Finkel is a director, an actor, a coach, you name it, Joshua does it. And in this particular instance, he is directing the staged reading of The Bully Problem that's coming up, and so we're going to talk to him about that process. I'd like to start, Michael, by talking about where you first came up with the idea for The Bully Problem and how it got started for you.
I think the earliest kernel of the show came to me in around 2004. I had this mental image of a robot electrocuting a bully. And I started with that, and I thought, okay, well, that's pretty cool. That's a neat idea. What can I do with that? What kind of world can I construct around that image to justify it and give it a context where it could happen? So from that point, I started developing the story that would eventually become The Bully Problem.
And to give it a little context, you joined New Musicals, Inc. a handful of years ago, came through our core curriculum, wrote your 15-minute musical, and also wrote a full-length show as part of the full-length curriculum. So you've already had a long process of development with us. Is that correct?
That's the case. I think I did the sandbox twice with you rather than doing the traditional full-length curriculum, but otherwise that's on
and just to be clear, the sandbox is a sort of a personalized development program where you get one-on-one sessions with me dramaturgically that you can schedule however you need, a couple of hours, 1 month, and then maybe a little bit of time goes by if you need more rewriting. And we worked on another show that way together, and we spent the last year or so working on The Bully Problem that way. So can you talk a little bit about what that getting that kind of feedback, how does that work for you as a writer?
What appealed to me about the sandbox problem was, one, that it was my only option, because that is the only option for single author shows.
That is true. We do not like to, it's not that we don't like to work with single author shows, we prefer to have at least 2 writers on a show, but when we're on a one-on-one basis like that, and that's your choice, then that's fine.
Well, that turned out to work fairly well for me because the one-on-one collaboration was a big appeal. I felt like I got lots of attention, which I certainly needed, and the sense of continuity in going from one person-on-person meeting to another really helped me see the show as it developed. There wasn't a sense of disconnect. I was able to move from one meeting to another and feel like I was making fairly steady progress. And if you're self-conscious about your material, the privacy is nice. So it was a big win, even though I had no alternative.
And I know that you would come to our meetings with a new draft, which I would read, I would make notes on it, and when I would talk to you and give you my feedback, my thoughts about what elements of the story were clear and which ones might need more work or ask you for clarification, you always recorded those. And so did you go back later and listen to those recordings again?
I am a caricature of someone who obsesses over details when it comes to this, so I recorded every conversation, and usually whatever feedback I got, I would listen to the recording and I would semi-transcribe it. I would jot down important notes. And this turns out to be very useful because there's often a lot that goes by in 2 hours, and sometimes you can grab, from the feedback you receive, you can grab the stuff that's most flattering and forget everything else. So as a self-disciplinary measure, I would record everything, and I found that it was a very useful technique.
All right, and so eventually you completed a draft of the show that you were happy with, and I had approached you about making it part of our Stages Festival and suggested that you put together a reading that we would do at our space in North Hollywood, and have that be part of our Stages Festival. So at that point, that's when you started looking for how you were going to put that together. So can you talk about the steps that you took to start to put together a writer-produced reading of your show?
Sure. Well, I'd been through this process before with a prior show with which I worked with you, too many prepositions, that I worked on with you in a prior year. So I'd been through the process before, but to look at it from a top-down perspective, I started with the director because I needed somebody who could kind of grok my comic sensibilities and bring out a lot of the things that I, as a non-performer, am insensitive to. I had worked with Joshua on a prior project and had a really good experience. And I knew him from the core curriculum because he directed our 15-minute musical final project for the year. So as often happens in the entertainment industry, you establish a creative relationship and then you want to carry it forward onto So once I locked down Joshua, I looked for a music director, I looked for some producers and some helpers with some of the organizational support team. And everyone on the team were people I trusted and who I'd worked with previously. So this builds on the theme of building on precedent. From that point forward, there was a very similar process with casting in many cases. There were people I'd worked with over the years, actors who'd been in some of my other shows, and I put out some calls and sent some emails and was excited when people could return and pitch in with this one, and heartbroken in a few cases where people had schedule conflicts, but I'm a big man, so I moved on. Reached out to a few new people and new faces that Joshua recommended, and a couple of recommendations from recommendations. Invariably, with a production like this, people will drop out at the last minute, so there's a little bit of scrambling, but because it's a very supportive community and actors are very willing to recommend friends and colleagues, we were able to cast a fairly substantially large show for this by the standards of a reading.
Great. And so that segues to Joshua, that you got to be your director. Now, Joshua, you have, besides your background as an actor and a director on existing projects, you have actually directed a lot of new musicals.
I have.
So you've had the opportunity, even world premieres. You directed the world premiere of A Ring in Brooklyn for us at the NoHo Arts Center a handful of years ago. So you've had a lot of experience taking a script that has never been staged and figuring out what to do with it. How do you do that? How do you approach it when you first get the script and someone says, take my baby and do something with it?
Oh my gosh. Well, a lot of it is, I approach everything from kind of an actor's point of view because I know that's how the actors will digest it. So I have to make sure that things kind of emotionally follow through and I can kind of track everybody's wants and where they go in their relationships. If things become incongruous or, things don't immediately gel with me or become clear, that's I'll just start to talk to Michael about like what his intention was so we can get clarifying on things. Then this is a giant show. There are 16 people in it. There actually could be, there's like more, we're doubling up on people. I think there's like how many, like if we were to single cast it, how many roles are like 20 something?
Something like that, yeah.
So, but Michael's eventual goal for this is to target this toward middle schools and high schools, to have it be a school show about bullying in a really inventive, funny, wonderful way. So I as a director, I'm also, and as an acting coach, and who works with all ages, I'm kind of helping Michael suss out as well. If we're thinking about the bigger picture, like the other day when we were having our sing-through, read-through, I was asking about keys, saying, okay, I'm a 12-year-old kid in 7th grade, and I've got to sing these crazy high notes and my voice is changing. How am I going to do that? So I was just talking about ranges of arrangements and kind of vocal fox and stuff of like what might be the best ideas. At the same time, looking at the big structure, and I would say looking at locations that are big and repeat, and how can I keep reinventing this space using and creating those locations without people just coming to the same two stands going, now it's the bedroom, to the same place. So there is a sense of movement, and then how much of the stuff, because a lot of the show is physical, how much can I get away with physicalizing it with that amount of people, and what needs to be read and sort of mimed or things like that. So we have a couple of special effects up our sleeves for some of the robot stuff, which will be fun. And so it's really just about mastering all of that and making sure that the actors are very, very clear about who they're playing and what the psychology is behind them, because this is a really fun opportunity for our cast because, as I said, we're doubling up roles. So people have a real great chance to become to go from a nerd to a snooty adult to a bully. People can kind of keep flipping through a very simple costume adjustment, but it really is going to be vocal and physical. So it's going to be, I'm going to do a little bit of a versatility class before we launch into the staging, so everyone kind of has we're all in the same, we all have the same toolbox that we can work from.
And you talk about staging. To be clear, this is a staged reading, which means your actors have limited rehearsal time.
Yep.
They are going to still
limited attendance.
Yes,
not everyone's in the same room at the same time.
You almost never get your whole
gosh.
cast together, and they have their book in hand. So that as you mentioned, there's a limit to how much staging you can do because
Right.
your actors actors have to be carrying
Have
a
to
book.
be-
They have to be reading from a book. So when,
Right.
when you get into physical moments, they can't really put the book down and do that sort of thing. So it's a different approach to if you were actually staging a production.
Right.
So what are some of the creative ways that you try to delve into? How can you physicalize something when you know someone's holding a book? And the other big thing that I think is one of the biggest decisions a director of a staged reading has to make is how many stage directions are you going to read to clarify for your audience, because sometimes you cannot tell them what's happening without a stage direction, and yet I think you usually want to limit them because they really tend to break the flow of the
Right.
piece. If you have to stop to say, he picks up his lunchbox and hits him over the head, and that just isn't as interesting to an audience as maybe seeing a mind movement. So
Right.
how do you start to figure out that balance?
I would say a lot of it will establishing scene locations or big events, like they are digging for this time capsule from 1955. Just something that's, I will curtail that and kind of just the minimal amount of stuff of what Michael wrote to make it clear for location, and then the rest, it's always better just to do it if you can. And I try to be very, very clear about that. If we establish a prop at the beginning, I don't have to say he hits him with a lunchbox. He enters carrying a lunchbox, and then you know that, and so if I hit you with it, you know that I had the lunchbox. That's how I would take care of that. And then physicalization, I think there's a lot that can be done with the physicality in and around stands itself. So how you peek up from above the stand, you can create a lot of different illusions simply by still being at the stand. Secondarily, I would say, depending upon who's speaking, let's say it's really one character's song and the other character is listening and reacting, but they don't have to really be on book. So I can have that other more silent person be physicalized and the other person could be pursuing them staying at the stand. So it looks like that person's following the other persons around the room and, being relentless with them and making them hear something. But it's really that the person who's singing is still at the stand, but it still creates movement in that way. So I'm still playing with it. We've been hacking through the music. Staging rehearsals start soon. And one thing that I think I'm going to do prior to actually getting on our feet would be to have everyone go through and here's the blueprint, here's the stand you're going to. So when we first start to go, everyone has the rough of the traffic copying in their book, and we can get it on its feet quicker and then finesse the moments and the relationships more during the blocking time that we have. That's kind of my goal, to use time a bit more efficiently.
Oh, and it's always a challenge.
Yes.
Now the whole purpose for a staged reading, I'll talk to you a little bit, Michael, as a writer. Why would you bother to do this? What do you get out of it as a writer to see the actors standing there in street clothes and holding a book, and not the full bells and whistles of a production? What does it do for you as a writer?
A stage reading gives me a first real sense through an approximation of a full performance of whether my show is working. There are many aspects of the story which seem deceptively successful on the page, particularly where pacing is concerned. The eye moves much faster than the ear, so you can scan a paragraph of dialogue on a page and think it's going by at a brisk pace, only to find when those words are pronounced by an actor that it's taking forever and it's killing the energy. So there are all these little pitfalls that you can have in the development of a show. And musical theater is particularly dependent on energy and pacing and a sense of progress through time, more so than I would say than a straight play. The stage performance, even as an approximation of the real thing, lets me see the story unfold over time, musically and in terms of dialogue, and there is no substitute for that. A writer literally has no idea whether their show is working until they've seen some kind of approximation of a performance. So this is an invaluable experience, and that it gives me that without the cost and overhead of a real production.
Before you're ready to move on to that, it helps you find out how ready you are to move on to the next stages.
Exactly right.
Yeah, right. And Joshua, you were talking earlier about when you first read a script, if there's areas where you need clarification, you'll talk to the writer. So certainly when you hand your script over, Michael, to a director and a music director and to the actors, that's not where your job ends. So I'd be interested to hear how have you guys been working out those moments of clarification, working with the music director, working with the actors? How does that generally work out in terms of Are there changes being made? Is it just clarification from your side, or is the piece continuing to develop?
We changed some keys where for this key, and everyone's like, oh, that's better. I was like, yeah, and that all sounds stronger. It's just experimentation, because some things are, as I said, in your head and it sounds great to a certain timbre, but then the people that are in front of you, you have to be flexible with that. Same thing with the voicing of some of the group numbers. In some of Michael's work, the higher tenor men are often doubling with the women. So you're having this one part come out with men and women, and then you have a couple of guys in the bottom men's part like being drowned out. So it was a thing where I said, okay, I'm going to have some sort of swing men. You guys in this song go down, so we have a stronger two-part, and then sometimes it splits to three. So that kind of balancing to make sure that, because, and I said this to, and diction, I said this to my cast. I said, remember that when you are birthing a new musical, you are the cast album. Like, there is nothing that we are sort of playing in our head and filling in the blanks because, oh, I know Oklahoma, I missed that word, but I know what it is. This is, everything that you say is crucial information. Everything is important. So diction, clarity, and really them understanding the muscularity of what that is to make it read. Like, that's it. I was just saying, don't stay on that gas pedal. You never get off that gas pedal of clarity and diction, because you are the conduit to us understanding what this musical's about.
Right. Same arena, when you hear actors speaking your words and singing your songs for the first time, I imagine there's a lot of different things that happen, because sometimes it must be just what you thought it was going to be, and that's very fulfilling. And other times, maybe it's not what you thought, and you're maybe disappointed. And other times, maybe you're surprised at what someone can bring to it that you might want to mine yourself. How do you deal with all of that coming at you during this process?
Well, if you think of the classic 7 stages of grief, I think, I try to fast.
Kubler-Ross, yeah.
Exactly. I try to fast track to acceptance, because reality is what it is, and if you wrote a line and it seemed to work in your head, but it just doesn't land in the dynamic of an actual performance, it doesn't help to nostalgically think about the good old days before you heard it read aloud. You have to go in there and fix the problem or adjust some of the lines of dialogue. So what I try to do is remember my intent, see what's happening on the stage, try to abstract away whether it's a nuance of a particular actor, maybe just there's a mismatch between the dialogue and the performer, and I can ride it out knowing that one day another performer will reapproach the material. Or it may just be that my writing was terrible and I need to make it less terrible. So the opportunity to make these mistakes in private are, again, a major benefit of both the production itself and rehearsal process.
Great. And after a reading like this, are you planning on seeking feedback? I know we're going to be doing a feedback session where you're going to get more feedback like you've been getting all during the sandbox. Are you going to be also asking for feedback from your audience members?
I try to do that, but I also try not to overwhelm them with requests for data. I try to give a big, wide canvas and an open invitation to say whatever comes to mind, maybe add a little bit of structure. I try not to make a really detailed quiz, because I've been the recipient of those things, and they're not fun. I want to allow for the possibility that the audience might have just enjoyed the show, and they might want to bask in the afterglow and digest what they'd seen. So I welcome audience feedback, but I try not to strong arm them to giving it.
I've often found, I think for writers in a staged reading, that the best feedback you get from the audience is the way they behave during the actual
That's
reading.
Exactly it.
John Sparks, our founding director,
Yeah.
says an audience can't lie. So if they think it's funny, they'll laugh. If they don't think it's funny, they won't. And so it really, and you can sense when they're shifting in their seats, and that's about the pacing you were talking about. You can start to think, is there something you as a writer can do to help that pacing? Is this, have I made my point, and I can move on and off to another thing? So I think you get a lot of what you need from an audience without them having to fill out a form necessarily.
It's true, and if you were to install a murder hole in the ceiling where I could hide and look down at the audience during a performance, I would spend the entire time there.
Watching them.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Filming it.
And the other thing too is, I often recommend to writers to have the opportunity or to do more than one performance, because depending upon the demographic of that particular audience, they might be very, very cerebral in their head and they're watching for structure and dramaturgy. That's who's in your house. And they're going to not just say, hey, Other people are, I'm here because my friend Michael invited me and I love his writing. I'm here to enjoy myself. So, depending upon the demographic tilt of that particular makeup of the audience, that's not working. We have to change it. Instead of like, well, let's see if the structure bears it out. You know what I mean? But then you'll know if something's really working. People can let their mind and their sort of the analytical mind go and really just go, and then those are your sweet spots that are really you want to keep and
Yes.
keep going with that.
Well, and a good reason too to if you only can have one performance, if that's the way it's working
Right.
out, to try and make sure that you have different types of people in the audience. You wouldn't
Yes.
want to do a reading for 5 or 6 people who are there to take notes,
Right.
as your only audience, because
Right.
that could be pretty dry.
Yes.
So you want to make sure that you've got some people in there that are your buddies that are going to have a good time. As a performer, and I'm sure you found this too, Joshua, that you can be touring the same performance across the country and do hundreds of performances and feel like you're delivering the lines the same way, and sometimes you get a laugh and sometimes you don't.
Right.
And I've often thought that it's a combination of the size of the audience and whether or not you have laughers in the audience if you're going for comedy. Because if you have a small house and there isn't a person who's comfortable laughing out loud, it can be dead. But if you have one person who's comfortable laughing out loud and they laugh once or twice, it frees everybody else up and they go with it. And that's the kind of person you want to hire.
You got to get your shill
to
in
come
there in the
with
opening.
you.
That's
yes,
right.
You want them to tour with you everywhere you go.
That's right. That's right. And it is just so important to. There's so many other demographics that I've done thousands of performances, as I think you as well, 9 months. But it depends on the day of the week. Everyone goes, go to the theater on Saturday night. That's the best night to go. No, it isn't. The actors have already done a matinee, so they're on the relax because it's their day off, and they've eaten and they've drank, and so they're kind of like, you know what I mean? And it's like Thursday night's a kicking night to go to the show. Because that's payday for the actors, so the actors are up. They've been checking their pocket, and for some reason, it's always it's a wonderful evening. I guess it's also the audience that goes on a weekday really wants to be
Really
there.
wants to. I always found Fridays were the worst because it's the end of the work week and people are very tired and
And they're
probably didn't
commuting.
really want to go.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you never know.
But for the bully problem, after you have your fabulous reading as part of stages and your wonderful audience response and all the laughter and you get to feel really good about what you've done, but then you have to deal with all the feedback. What is the next step in the process, Michael, after you've had this kind of a reading and gotten some feedback both from your director, from your music director, from your actors, from dramaturgs, from the audience? What do you do with that?
I think the most important feedback I'm going to get is going to be from the video that we record, because I know that during the performance I'm going to be so excited that I'll be in an effective sensory deprivation tank. Everything's going to fly by. I went skydiving once when I was in college, and I barely remember the experience because it was such a sensory overload, and this is going to be the same thing. So the video will let me recreate the experience of seeing the show and give me the strongest possible sense of how well things are working. I will look at all the surveys, I will listen to all the dramaturgs, I will certainly take all the verbal feedback I can get, but seeing and hearing it is the real benefit, and I think that is what I'm going to attend with the greatest focus afterwards.
And assuming that after that you make some decisions about rewriting, because writing is rewriting, as they say, and you're inevitably going to do some revisions, what would you see as the next steps along the way that you would like to see happen to the show?
I certainly like to find an opportunity for a real production if I feel that it's ready after this iteration. I'd be open to some additional workshops if they were in front of a large enough audience that it gave me more feedback along those lines. But if I feel that I've got something strong, I think I'm ready to reach out to production partners, theater companies with which I've developed a relationship, see what opportunities I can, that I have to put it on its feet. Possibly in a fringe environment, possibly in a school environment, whatever seems promising. I think that would be the next logical step after it seems that the core is intact.
Cool. Well, and with everyone that we've been interviewing in this process, we've been asking a sort of a fantasy question, which is that if you were to wake up tomorrow morning and somebody hands you $100 million that is earmarked for the development of new musicals, how would you want to spend it? Joshua, why don't you start?
I would spend it, first of all, I would say I would love to do something that is unique and original. And that goes down from the new trend of LED design, saying we don't need one more LED show. That was great 5 years ago. Now they're all LED, and there's also now a complacency around that. The same thing with some of a typical pop rock score sometimes. Like, I don't remember that one song from the last song. So I guess part of me would be taking pitches for really wonderful original ideas, and then I would line up my all-time, favorite team of people. Like, do I want it to be a Sondheim musical because I can hire Sondheim, or do I want it to be, that kind of a thing? Like, what would be?
Because money's no object.
Money's no object. You can buy anybody. It doesn't matter. It's like, sure, I can pay for you. Doesn't whatever you want. I mean, that. I think that it would just people that are really committed to the craft and committed to the journey, and I think all those people who really have gone through the process, they know that writing is rewriting. It's a long road, but I think if the project is exciting enough, everyone will be on board and stick with it. And I think that, and definitely take it through like a regional pipeline on the way to New York. That would be a great thing, which would also involve productions in other theaters and national exposure to the show prior to it landing in New York. So you already have a fan base, you already have the makings of a national tour later because different regions have been exposed to that show. It would be kind of a smart marketing in advance. And then look at the trends that are currently hitting and what could be a very successful show. Or maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's like, do your art because it's not about it being successful because you already have the money. Maybe that's like, I don't care if people like it or not. I don't know. I guess it's pretty good to have people like it. I'm hoping they would. So that's how I'd spend it.
Right. How about you, Michael, as a writer? What do you think? What would you do with that pile of cash?
I have to ask first off, are we allowed to spend any on ourselves?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Well, in that case, I would probably, to combine both answers, I would set up some kind of foundation. I would appoint myself CEO, give myself a comfortable salary so I could focus all of my life on art. That having been taken care of, I feel like we'd have at least 200 million left. I would like to set up some kind of foundation that encouraged a kind of development of new musicals. And in particular, I would love to foster excellence in storytelling through music. And I mean something very specific by that. As I see a lot of new musicals, I see a lot of musical talent, but I don't see a lot of skill in using that musical talent in the process of storytelling. And I think recognizing new shows that do integrate the book and the score effectively and giving them financial support would make me very happy, because that's something of which I'd like to see a lot more in new musicals.
I totally agree. It's all about the book, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
The story doesn't work if the story isn't compelling and doesn't grab your audience. You're really nowhere.
I'm preaching to the choir here.
And also getting the show to a point where any actor picks it up or anybody picks it up and it works. So it's not contingent upon one virtuoso performance and boy, I hope I find that person for the national tour or whatever. Mm-hmm. That you're building a show that is accessible and doable so it can continue its generation and keep going into schools, going into regional theaters, going into community theaters, and the piece itself is valued and cherished. And the
really
story
becoming
is
part of the repertoire.
The repertoire, and that it moves people. That's what I would say, that the story has some kind of reveal or just like an awakening to a point, or a reveal of something that's happening culturally that we can all get on board and kind of take with us into the world, and it makes a difference. And you think about that musical, or you think about that moment, or you think about that staging, and you go, that really affected me. And right here, if I'm standing at Ralph's in line, and I have a choice between a couple of things, how I treat this person or how I treat this person in another way, that comes back to you, and it shifts your life. I mean, that's what I want.
The power of art.
The power of art,
yes.
But really.
I'd like to wrap up by asking each of you also, a two-part question. What do you think is the future of musical theater? It ties into what you were just talking about. And what advice would you give to the writers that are currently working on the musicals of tomorrow? Joshua.
I would keep saying, keep striving for a unique voice, but at the same time, value, study, and incorporate the geniuses of the past. structurally, so that you're not full of kind of sloppy near rhymes and songs that all sound the same and you can't distinguish one from the other. You know what I mean? And I think that's having what I call like a very, very sort of tight theme. Everything stays inside that square. I think it's just flying out here for no reason that's not connected. That's how I coach cabaret act building, and I think musicals are the same way, that everything has some kind of thing that harkens back and threads through the tapestry and makes a difference. So I'd say that's, to me, the best kind of show, where it's just like, oh, it's so tightly wound and beautifully and economical and yet moving and full of heart and truth. And if this sounds like a song you've heard, it probably is. Find something new, but also ideally something catchy. Like, that's one of the things I love your score so much, because it's got a great kind of, it's true, it's got a great pop rock sound, which is great for today's music and market, as well as the schools that you're trying to target into. The kids will love that. At the same time, so it's catchy, and I walk out singing it, which is, that's with me the next day. But his lyrics are so smart that it's not vacuous. So it has a nice sweet spot of both. It's catchy, I remember it, and what I'm singing about is beautifully written and makes a difference. That's the good stuff.
Great.
Yeah.
So Michael, other than finding a director who will compliment you like that, what advice would you give to other writers?
The biggest, I guess the best advice I can give is to start small and iterate. When I began writing for theater, I wrote exclusively 10 to 15-minute musicals, and I wrote a group of them. And I changed the genre each time, so I'd give myself a little practice in writing in a different style. And that experience was invaluable because it let me go through the cycle of having a success or a failure or making mistakes or doing something right quickly. I could bring a project to fruition within a few months and not a few years, and move on quickly. And I think that's invaluable. I see a lot of young writers who sink in years of effort on a project which is their first impulse. And unfortunately, it becomes a big energy drain because they may be going down a dead end and not realizing it. So by working small and gradually increasing the scope of a project, you can develop the skill set you need to look ahead and be able to manage a big project efficiently. So that's something I did for myself, and I recommend it to every writer of musical theater.
That's very smart.
Great idea. Just get your work out there, because that's as you say, that's the only way you can learn is to see it in front of an audience. So you've got to get it out there any way you can.
Well, that's another corollary of this approach. There are a lot of opportunities to perform a 10 or 15-minute musical. Of course, NMI includes that as part of. But even outside of an academic setting, there are many, many, many 10-minute play festivals and short play festivals.
And fringe festivals like the Hollywood Fringe, where you did your quartet of shows.
Exactly right. And
Or even just open mics at cabaret evenings around town. You can do 10 minutes,
You certainly can. I think that there are a lot of commercial short play festivals and that they're open to a paying public. And some of them will even produce a musical that you send their way. It's not common, but it will happen. And I've had the pleasant experience of mailing off a show to some distant state or country and having that produced and getting back some photos and recordings. And it's a wonderful experience.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for talking to us today about the bully problem. And we're going to be looking forward to the staged reading of that coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
And it will be videoed, as you mentioned, and people will be able to watch it and see what we were talking about. And thanks for talking to us today, guys. It was
Thanks,
nice.
Elise.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
us.